a little get-together yesterday to sort of talk about what kind of questions, and I really felt that the cleaners could be coming around with the brooms at midnight and they'd still be talking. So I'm not going to get in the way too much. I'm just going to basically prep them with some questions and then let it roll. So yeah, my first question is ASIC resistance a myth? Aren't GPUs ASICs too?
So an important thing to clarify here is when you say ASIC resistance, those people who are for ASIC resistance are not against something called ASIC. They are against something that is a custom hardware that is more efficient than the hardware available to the masses or the general hardware. So I do believe ASIC resistance in that way is futile because there will be some custom hardware always. If you have a coin that's worth mining, someone will find a more efficient way of mining it, whether it's ASICs or some other way, which gives them equal advantage that ASIC cannot. For example, maybe I live in a country where I have a good connection with the government and I can get almost free electricity. Now, I am maybe 1,000 times more efficient than someone without buying any ASIC. So yeah, if you are against ASICs in that way, you are just against competition.
Well, I think ASIC resistance is more of a philosophy than a practical approach that people can implement. If you look at things, GPUs are ASICs, CPUs are ASICs, and the blockchain processors we make are ASICs. Fundamentally, the philosophy behind ASIC resistance has been to make products memory hard. And so what you end up doing is you end up buying GPUs primarily to be ASIC resistant. You pay a lot for memory, and inherently the hash rate is a lot slower. The philosophies around ASIC resistance are that it's widely available. You can go to AMD or NVIDIA to buy those products. But fundamentally, it's not a good mining solution. You can see that in today's world, and very shortly, that GPUs are not profitable. And we see that as technology moves along, the GPUs will be dwarfed by ASICs.
There are two things. First of all, you're already using an ASIC. It's the same chip technology in your CPU and your GPU. So if somebody makes a new chip, they could basically just make another GPU or CPU, and they would already be at the same level. So you lost this battle even before it started. So that's kind of pointless to try that. But the good thing is that it's not necessary to worry about the ASICs themselves. They're harmless. But the dangerous thing is ASIC dominance, so that ASICs can get a big competitive advantage over anything else, and then lots of bad things can happen, that all of a sudden, with a very small effort, small investment, somebody can do a 51% attack or similar things. And there was this traumatic experience with Bitcoin where this happened because the developers didn't really think of what hardware can do, what ASICs can do. And they didn't expect this, so it hit them out of the blue, and that was terrible. But nowadays, things have changed a bit. First of all, with ETH makes it also a bit harder for the ASICs, so they cannot reap such enormous benefits. And also the technology has matured, so it's not that the first comer basically gets to take everything, and it's very easy to have this initial advantage. So I would say that ASIC resistance, it has actually happened now, and in the sense that the technology has withstood the risk of ASIC dominance.
So I guess I have a very different background from everybody else on the stage because my interest has always been mainly in the applications that you could build on top of the blockchain and on top of Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So just to get, I think it's kind of funny, and a lot of people might laugh at me, but about a year ago, before the 51% attack, I really believed when people said ASIC resistant, I thought it meant that you could profitably mine at a home computer. You could basically take your home computer and actually mine Ether. And it wasn't until I started doing research into it that I figured out that that is actually completely false. So I think that there's a huge disconnect between what people in the hardware industry say when they talk about ASIC resistance, where they answer with questions like, oh, well, there really is no such thing as ASIC resistant, versus what's been sold to people, end users, developers, which is that ASIC resistance means that you can mine out of your home computer. And, you know, once I figured out that that actually is just completely false. You can't do that at all profitably. It would probably destroy your graphics cards after a pretty small amount of time. Then I basically came to the conclusion that maybe this abstract ASIC resistant thing is possible, but we have yet to see a real transparent implementation of it that doesn't just stay ASIC resistant because the documentation is bad, but is actually ASIC resistant because of some special property of it. And I don't think we've seen that yet. So far I would say it's futile, but I do have my mind open, so I'm willing to have my mind changed at some point.
So yes, I mean, I guess to sort of summarize back, the lay person, you know, man in the streets understanding of ASIC resistant is very different from the reality for someone who has been involved in the semiconductor industry. Would that be true?
Right. Let me summarize that by pointing out some physics, right? So the real difference on ASIC resistance technology today is external memory versus internal memory. So when we look at the bandwidth on external memory, we're talking gigabytes. When we're talking about internal memory that can, or on-chip performance, we're talking, you know, terabytes. So essentially it's orders of magnitude faster, and that's why ASICs are always faster than external memory. Not to mention that they're much lower cost.
Okay, so my second question is that you know, the experience that there's been with SHA-256 on Bitcoin and friends, you know, has shown that there can be real market imbalances. That, you know, the lead shifts around, and, you know, that the ideal of a level playing field, you know, has not come to be, which I suppose is really the origin of the ASIC resistance myth. It is really a desire to see a level playing field, as opposed to there being anything specifically evil about ASICs. You know, they're just a hardware form rather than a software form. You know, there's no fundamental difference. So could you tell us a little bit about some of the factors that do contribute to it not being a level playing field?
Yeah, I would love to actually share a little bit of research that I did into this, because that was something that fascinated me so much, and because, like, obviously my proposal with SHA-3, I really wanted to look into, well, what were the early days of Bitcoin mining like? So after really doing a lot of research into it, I think that Satoshi really underestimated how fast people would be able to develop ASICs. So if you look at the emission curve for Bitcoin, it really was like 50 Bitcoin per block for a period of like 4 years, or I think like 3 years after 2008. And if you started seeing immediately, like, people started going with GPUs, they started getting like small ASICs, and really by like 2012, 2013, you started seeing ASICs. And you can see quotes from Satoshi at the time, who was saying things like, yeah, it'll take about a decade before people start. He definitely did envision there being specialized miners in the future, but I don't think that it was envisioned that it would happen so fast.
Well, I mean, perhaps that, you know, the Satoshi group perhaps were quite similar to the Ethereum core developers in being software engineers, not hardware specialists.
Absolutely.
So really unable to adequately assess that themselves.
Yeah, and it is what it is. But what's so interesting to me about the emission curve of Ethereum Classic is that right now only 53% of ETC has been mined, and of that, half of that has been through the pre-sale, half of that has been through Ethash mining, and the rest of the emission curve should take us through about 2080. So it's a really, really friendly emission curve, actually. So I think that if you think about distribution as saying, all right, well, a third of these coins went to the original ICO investors, whether you think that's good or bad, it happened. Another third of those coins went to the first miners who really were ASIC resistant, like people mining on their GPU computers. And then now the final third will go to people, and truly the long-term health of the network and the transaction fees will go to more sort of professional and specialized miners, creating specialized hardware that can go in people's homes, et cetera. I actually think that that's somewhat of a fair distribution. I don't think that's a big issue at all.
Sort of a commoditization.
Yeah, I think it's a good blend actually of distribution within the wider economy.
I would say that nowadays, given that all the crypto coins do make a lot of money, well, the successful ones, of which are many enough, you have to assume that whatever you do, there will be ASICs. So whatever changes you make or whatever new things you invent, you have to think how could you make an ASIC for that and how would this perform, and this will tell you then where your weaknesses might be and where your strengths will be and where you would contribute to creating some opportunities that you may not want to create. And for this, well, you can learn how to make such things, study how such ASICs work, or you can also talk to people who make hardware and basically familiarize yourself with the realities of that part. You cannot really keep those things apart anymore. The ASICs, as soon as there's a chance that a coin will be moderately successful, somebody will make an ASIC. So then the question doesn't become whether there's a level playing field between CPUs, GPUs, and ASICs, but the question is there a level playing field among ASICs? And then you need to focus on the economical aspect and access to technology on the ASIC side, because there are different tech nodes. You can have very relatively large transistors, so you have a low density on your chip, but the process is easily accessible. Anybody can make such a chip, given enough money, but your chip will not be the most efficient. Or you can make an extremely efficient chip with very small structures in the chip. It will be very expensive, and it will be only for some selected few, because the semiconductor fabs, they can't talk to a lot of people about this. This also needs huge engineering efforts on their side. You can't just go to the website of TSMC and select, I want a 5 nanometer process, and here upload my Gerbers, and poof, it comes out like from a Chinese PCB fab. It doesn't work like that. This is an involved process. You have to talk to them. You give them their files. They check them. They send you feedback. You revise your files and so on. And they also need to trust the customer, that they know that they're not wasting the time with them, because they only have a few engineers who can do this. So they want to work on serious projects, and so it means that. It's important to make things that are not excessively ASIC friendly, because then if you reach that point, then you make things a bit too easy for very few big players who have this access, and you keep out the others. So that then you basically create a monopoly or a duopoly, but there isn't much room for more. And so this has to be taken into account. But most importantly, when thinking about any changes, talk to hardware people, let them think about it, let them think of possible exploits, where they could say, oh, you have this nice algorithm here, but you see all these things here, they are simple enough that I can solve this in much less time than you think. And then you might say, okay, well, maybe I don't actually need it anyway, so you throw it away. Or if you really need it, then you need to think about making it harder, and also making it hard in the sense that it stays hard over time, not that it's something that with the next generation of chips will already be possible. So, yeah, make informed decisions. That's the important thing.
To answer your question, Bob, about what are the factors that do not make a level playing field, I believe there are none unless there is some organization or that starts making rules, or a central authority that starts making rules. Until there are no rules, it's a level playing field, and you will have someone who's more competitive than the others. Now I say that because my experience of joining the mining industry was when I joined a small ASIC miner maker in Shenzhen in 2014, and we couldn't compete with the other ASIC manufacturers at that time. There were many. And I realized that the only company that was doing it best at that time was Bitmain, which was shipping the miners on time, working its ass off to produce the next gen miner ASAP, taking the risks that come with it by working on the next miner and producing a lot of quantities that are ready to ship, because that time there were a lot of companies doing pre-sales, which means they don't have the product, they make it after they have the money. So Bitmain was taking all these risks, being one of the underdog players, because that time the company that was most successful was ASIC Miner. ASIC Miner was the brand. It was run by Fried Cat, one of the first rock stars of the Bitcoin world after Satoshi himself. So no one thought Bitmain could make the most efficient miner, but they did. Because there were no rules in Bitcoin, no one was making rules saying, hey, we want this algorithm to be changed because we are unhappy about someone being more successful than the others in the chip making field, which is what happens in other cryptocurrencies. We see it now, like in Monero. They have ASIC resistant schedule, and in this schedule, only 4 or 5 or a handful of code developers have the knowledge of what will be the next algorithm before anyone else does. So that is their solution to ASICs, which is centralization of proof of work and having confidential information. So if I was NVIDIA or Intel or the biggest chip maker, I can pay one of these developers a lot of money to get information on what will be the next algorithm. And why was this situation created? Because some people wanted to create rules. And when you create rules, that's when it's not a fair competition anymore, just like we see in the world outside, where government creates a lot of regulations and then things are not fairly competitive.
Well, that's sort of like the point that Nick Szabo's been making about social scalability, and really saying that you want to have the minimum number of decisions to be made, because the more and more decisions you've made, the more and more human interference that you get, and the more and more gameable it is. So, you know, the absolute best is never change anything ever. You know, that's obviously not totally realistic, because, you know, you learn, assumptions that were made maybe are denial of service vector, you know, problems, or, you know, are dreadful in some other way.
Yeah, and so I think that you brought up a really interesting point. So there is sort of a social contract between developers of the blockchain who are creating the software and then the miners who are mining on top of it. So I think that if you actually go back and you read like a lot of the blog posts, so my personal belief is that I love SHA-3. I think SHA-3 is amazing. If there were to be another SHA-4 that was created that was ruled to be safer and higher performance than SHA-3, I'll be the first person on board to say, hey, let's preemptively move to the best algorithm possible.
And that's very like the point that Boris was making about licensing, right?
Yeah.
Right. If you lock yourself in, you're probably at some point going to go, ooh, that was a bad decision. Equally, you do, like, that continuity is of great value.
So I think that what software developers and the node developers should offer to the miners is basically saying that we're only going to demand two things, which is safety and high performance. And then how the industry builds around that, I think, should not be a concern of the developers. That is, the developers should not be economically planning who's going to be a winner, who's going to be a loser, because we've seen that pursued a lot of times, and it always ends up in a failure state.
And to add to that, it's even worse when there are reactionary measures by developers.
Yes.
As we see in Ethereum and Monero, these reactionary measures show the centralization of the coin even more.
So Henry,
so there's 3 points I would add to a level playing field. So the first is legal. We all seen wars in the other communities where people actively use patents to prevent people from entering. So that's one example of unlevel playing field. Next one is economic, although Alex, you said economic's not an issue. It's a huge issue in business. For instance, Bitmain gets access to 7 nanometer technology. Not everyone else does. So, fundamentally, those create barriers to entry. So, the large people tend to dominate this business, and people wait for breaks to get into the business. So the third one is technical. Fundamentally, what we see is that, the reason that SHA-256 is on a level playing field is, one, because of this access to technology, but secondly, it's the innate expertise you build up over time. A lot of the SHA-256, uses adders and multipliers, and by and large, those are really subject to customization. So over time, you learn to build more and more. You learn to make this better and better. Companies like Bitmain can say, they can get the technology to cut themselves wrong, but they can absorb that. Having a product that doesn't work. A small company can't do that. Now, fundamentally, when Alex talks about a SHA-3, we like SHA-3 because we think it creates a level playing field. Fundamentally, it's very digital, so there isn't a lot of change that happens. There isn't a lot of differences between the vendors. You and I had that conversation last night where we said there isn't going to be a lot of difference between a 28 nanometer product and a 16 nanometer product. The fundamental scalability of that performance level is the same as the difference in ASIC technology. So, when you look at a business overall, you can say that there's the technology leads, there's the economic leads, and people pick their points. When a market changes, that's when the order tends to shuffle. He who gets there first, manages to establish some kind of, position in the marketplace, then it's a free-for-all, and the market kind of figures itself out based on price and performance. And that's typically how we've seen technology markets evolve.
I would say regarding ignoring things outside of just the algorithm and such, I would say that this is just what's dangerous. Of course, it would be silly to imagine some specific attack and then build a protection against this. It's like if you want to protect the border and you put a tiny little wall there, expecting that the intruder will come just at this point and bump into the wall instead of going around, right? So that wouldn't make sense. But you can find out, are there actually intruders on this side, for example? What do I have to worry about? Understand the threat scenario, and then you can see how do I perform in this threat scenario, and what are the things that I need to pay attention to. And I think it's really, really important to do that.
Okay, so my final question now, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience and from the troll box, if Yaz is on the troll box, if you're on the case there. So yeah, my final question is, really, Bitcoin and Ethereum are, massively bigger than the whole everything else below. Those are the two major mining markets by a long stretch. And on the Bitcoin side, they're very, very tied to SHA-256. I would imagine that only, a mortal threat of, that the encryption is broken, we need to upgrade kind of thing, would likely make them move. So you really see Ethereum as the one sort of threat vector that's really a feasible place for a change. So just in general, when you have people advocating for a change of hashing for a given blockchain, what kind of economic incentives are we talking about? If changes are made there, what kind of scale of economic impact does that have within the mining industry?
I would say huge, right? So you can look at it from a couple perspectives. Anytime something changes, you're going to basically, as I said earlier, instill some kind of change in leadership or some kind of change in market position. So we can look at it a couple ways. I'm a new company coming in. If there's a change, I'll look at it more than an incumbent stream. We obviously look at our technical strengths and we say, is there something we can dominate? So ASIC resistance, memory hard, my GPU background would say target those. And you get out there early, those machines are worth a lot. You look at the hash rate, you say if the hash rate converts on an equivalent basis and there's only 10,000 miners available, then you can divide that by the ROI and say these damn machines should cost $100,000 each, right? You as a miner would basically come in and say, I'm going to pay you $100,000 because I want first access to it. So there's a lot of motivation to get your machines out first and get the best machines. And then, there's the nefarious part of it, which is if you can influence the spec to favor you, then that's even better. Or if you can get some kind of secret sauce, like what's rumored in some of one of the upcoming changes that, one hardware vendor has some embedded secrets that, that's an inherent big advantage for the hardware vendor over the other hardware vendors.
So, I mean, what kind of sums are we talking here?
We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars.
Hundreds of millions
you
of dollars.
look at it this way, right? So the Ethereum network, I'll use Ethereum as an example. The hash rate is 180 terahashes, I believe. That translates into 6 million GPUs. So imagine if those entire 6 million GPUs were replaced, what the economic value of those are. You say $200 each times 6 million, I haven't done the math, but it's got even the billions of dollars.
I think that's $1.2 billion.
I'll take that any day, Bob.
Yeah, we could probably use that money for something a little more altruistic and helpful for humanity, couldn't we?
Or I'll give you a whole bunch of dev fees to build up ETC.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, so again, to go from like the developer's perspective, I think that what dApp developers want really right now is they want a programmable Bitcoin. That is I've been doing a bunch of work with dApps. What do people want at the end of the day? They want to be able to program something that's Turing complete, but that has the same security guarantees, the same financial parameters that Bitcoin has. The beauty of Ethereum Classic is that you don't even have to rewrite your smart contracts. Literally just push one extra button and deploy it there and let your users decide. And I think that that's going to create a tremendous amount of value for the actual developers building on top of these platforms. Because right now, if they're tied to one platform, they can't necessarily hit as many. There might be people out there that they would love to use these dApps, but they don't believe that Ether is money. They don't think that ETH is viable currency. So why would they ever want to use something like Augur or like MakerDAO? But if there's a version of those that exist on Ethereum Classic that have the capped supply, that have the high level of hash power, that has the proof of work and the decentralization, then you've just opened up an entirely new economic space. And everybody's happy because the miners are getting their transaction fees. The load might be reduced on the ETH network because it would bring some people over. And it increases demand for the ETC based token because that's what you would be doing the transactions in. So I think it's great for everyone in this room.
Any mining technology only has a certain lifetime. So if changes happen with enough early warning that everybody can prepare, that chip manufacturers can make corresponding chips, and also the miner operators, that they can plan their upgrades and replacements accordingly, then the economic impact doesn't have to be extremely huge because those things don't live forever anyway. So after a few years or so, then it probably doesn't make sense to keep your old miners around because they're already too inefficient and you're just paying too much for electricity. Well, maybe your electricity is really cheap and you don't care, but in most cases you will probably want to upgrade every once in a while, whether there are any changes or not. So this is not such a big issue. If you spring changes on people, surprisingly, then yes, it would have a big impact because you're obsoleting a lot of the infrastructure in a very short time. But then you get other issues. Then you have the risk that all of a sudden you will create some dominances where you didn't expect to find them. If the rule change is completely unexpected, then it's basically, well, some people will be able to react more quickly. They might even have something that actually works for the new thing, and so they just flip a switch, and the others who are not so lucky, and you didn't know this before because you didn't talk to anybody, because you wanted to spring a bad surprise on them, they will go away, and all of a sudden you have a monopoly there, and it might not even be the one you expected. So there are all sorts of issues there. Plus, if you make too many changes, or make changes too often, you're increasing your attack surface. Because in every change, there's the risk that you overlook something. And I'm especially scared of those proposals where they plan to make changes very rapidly. Things like when people think, yeah, we really, really don't like ASICs, for example. We're terribly afraid of them. And as soon as an ASIC pops up, we will change immediately. So kill it before it even grows. And then when the next shows up, then we kill it again, and so on. So there would be no end of rapid changes, hasty changes, and sooner or later you will not get it right, and then the algorithm will be exploitable, and horrible things will happen. So that's a big risk, and I think it's important also when making those changes to be really careful not to overlook any things, and not open those, not defending against the minor risk. By inviting some much more devastating risk.
So I agree with everything Werner said. I do think that this cost of sudden change can be avoided by giving enough time to all the ecosystem participants, not just the manufacturers of the machines, because everyone needs time to plan accordingly. Even the dApp developers need time to plan accordingly. Second, I do also agree very much with that doing changes too often increases the chances of an attack or vulnerability being discovered. And there's another aspect of making changes too often, which is the time it takes or the efforts that it takes. So in all the cryptocurrencies that we know today, there's a limited open source pool of contributors, or pool of open source contributors. And if they're spending their time and efforts on just fighting ASICs every 6 months, that is really a waste of time and skills, which can be better spent on increasing adoption, increasing usability of the cryptocurrency, all the things that are core to the idea of the cryptocurrency and can help achieve a mass adoption. And we are so far from our mass adoption. Like, cryptocurrencies are probably, 0.5% of the world users, and we are wasting our resources on these futile things.
So to just try and summarize that, back then there are incredibly gigantic economic incentives behind change of hash proposals. These have very large impact on the whole ecosystem. There's a reason that seat is empty. Okay, so let's take some audience questions. Can I just... Oh, you have one?
Where do you guys see Ethash, the hash rate for Eth1.0 going after their transition to proof of stake?
So this is the perennial meme in the space, which is that we shouldn't switch the hashing algorithm because Ethereum is going to go to ETH 2.0 to proof of stake. That's going to happen in 18 months because it's always 18 months away. And we're going to get all of this hash power, and it's going to be great because all of these miners were supposedly going to disappear. So here's the reason why I used to believe this myself. Like, I used to think that was like the plan. The reason why I don't like that as a plan is because right now we're a minority algorithm. So every day that Ethereum 2.0 doesn't come out and we have the same hashing algorithm as Ethash, as Ethereum, we are in danger. So the longer that we attempt to keep this story alive of the miners are going to come to us after the transition, the longer we have to stay in a position of what I see as incredible danger. And if you go to etcstatus.live, which is tracking in real time the diversity of the mining pools, we routinely hit times in which there are more than 51% of the network controlled by a single mining pool. So we're not in a safe position yet after this attack. And the attack happened about 9 months ago. So
what's the ratio of hash between the two projects right now?
So we're 1/20th the size.
Right.
So ETH has 20x the hash power. So all it takes is one pool to dislike Ethereum Classic, and they can just basically bring us down again. And honestly, if they hit us with a few more 51% attacks, we are like in a difficult position, because exchanges are going to start considering delisting us because we become a massive liability. That means honest miners aren't going to be able to convert their ETC into fiat to pay for their power bills. And then it basically becomes impossible for developers to develop on ETH, on Ethereum Classic, because it's difficult for consumers to access the chain.
So I'm not going to go all the way down the line. Are any of you got anything to add on the question of ETH hash specifically?
Yeah, I would think that, if I listen to my economics professor that's like 10 miles down the road at UBC, he would say that marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So fundamentally what happens is that as people leave ETH hash, then we're left with this giant pool of GPU miners, and they're going to crowd on the marketplace, and they're all going to become unprofitable. So the moment that they're unprofitable, they're all going to just start backing off till, at least just some kind of equilibrium. I don't know what that number is, but it's going to be significantly smaller than this today.
Is merge mining with Ethereum a viable option?
I personally don't consider it a viable option because the Ethereum roadmap is to explicitly leave behind proof of work. So I don't think that it'll be easy to convince the Ethereum community to... I also really dislike the philosophy of us being kind of merge mined with Ethereum. It's just like there's something about that which is just kind of so weak. Like we have to depend on Ethereum for the security of this network. So I personally would much rather go our own way with our own algorithm than have to depend on ETH 1x for our security.
What about merge mining with Bitcoin?
I mean, just looking at the Bitcoin space right now, and it's SHA-256 is very crowded, and I think that I don't want to put us in that realm as well, because I think that it's such a crowded market for that hash power right now.
But if it's merge mined, why does it matter? Like, Namecoin for a moment had the highest hash rate of any coin in the world because it was being merge mined with both Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. So if you're merge mined with SHA-256, you could probably get more security than any other chain.
I think that SHA-3 is better than SHA-256. I'm sorry. I just think it's a better algorithm for all of the reasons above or in the presentation. So you're right in the short term that it would be a huge increase in hash power. I think it opens up a lot of vulnerabilities, but I think 5, 10, 20 years down the road, we're much stronger going with the cutting edge right now.
Also, it might be, it also dilutes the commitment that the miner has to EDC, because now he's not just invested in EDC, but he's invested in Bitcoin mining and just mining EDC as a byproduct. And that could have some other consequences, or maybe lose some benefits.
So this is kind of off mining. What's your favorite dApp, and what would you like to see developed? And do you use cryptocurrency yourself, or is it purely creating mining hardware just for the sake of creating mining hardware? Are you actually part of the community and interested in dApp development on top of it?
So I don't know about others, but we at Bitmain, like I mentioned in the presentation today, have a very strong belief in cryptocurrencies and its power to change the world. That is why we took a strong stance during the Great Skilling debate, because we believe Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies should be used as a peer-to-peer electronic cash and bring permissionless to the whole world. Not just those who can afford high transaction fees, but any person, even the unbanked in Africa. And we do use cryptocurrencies wherever we can. We don't pay salaries to the employees in Bitcoin Cash because we cannot, because we are based in China, and it's not a legal tender or a currency recognized by the government. But the company did give every employee eating allowance in Bitcoin Cash. And we have about more than 1,500 employees, so every month they are getting a allowance, eating allowance in Bitcoin Cash. That's a pretty significant use case of cryptocurrencies within the company. Besides that, I personally use Bitcoin Cash whenever I can to make transactions.
What's your favorite dApp, though?
I haven't used any dApps for now.
Okay.
At Lindsay, we focus mainly on the hardware. So that's first of all the mining, but then also to see how we can develop things a bit further from there, because making a single purpose mine, it's kind of boring in a sense, right? It would be more interesting if we could add some programmability and make this thing a bit more flexible. Maybe could even calculate something useful. Maybe you could use it for other things like some AI algorithms or similar problems. And so that's more of the direction into which we are looking, not so much into specific dApps, but maybe there's also something that could come from that angle, which we don't see. So yes, if anybody has ideas of that sort, things that could be better supported by hardware, or maybe even some specialized chips that could help the general ecosystem. I mean, think that there might be something that the nodes could benefit from, not the miners, but the full nodes. So there might be other opportunities of where chips could be used, where maybe even the same technology with some more flexibility could be used, especially if the algorithms that involve memory, so you already have a cost for the memory, and then the logic is not such a huge element in there, and you can also, for example, make it a little bit bigger without sacrificing any benefits.
I think I might make a guess at what your favorite dApp is.
I have many. I mean, it's my space. But I will actually just say that one thing that I'll personally love to work on once I have more time and the SHA-3 testnet is up is I believe that we really can make on-chain futures contracts for mining itself. So right now, issuing bonds or issuing futures is something that you have to, for Bitcoin, is something you have to go to a trusted third party to be able to do. But because the Ethereum virtual machine can analyze Keccak 256 natively, I think that it is possible, and I'm going to be doing some research and work towards actually creating an on-chain future template so that basically miners can issue sort of bonds or futures on their mining proceeds, and that can be delivered back to investors trustlessly. I think it'll be a fun project.
So then, Henry.
I guess the best for last. So we don't use, I don't have a favorite dApp. In terms of the company, we don't transact in cryptocurrency because of the inherent risk of stability of the coin. We are a small company, so we do transact in fiat. All my people that work for the company are true crypto enthusiasts, and sometimes a little bit too enthusiastic, because we're always looking at our screen saying, what's the price of Bitcoin today, or what's the price of Ethereum today?
And just sort of for disclosure on the co-op, we're in a similar situation. You know, we are a registered public charity in the US, so we have to be extremely careful about use of crypto for our own operations. And I think that's the same is true for many legitimate businesses. I hope that won't be the case for long. I personally would love to see clear regulatory guidelines which are crypto friendly. but that has to be done in a educated, not knee-jerk kind of way.
Agreed.
Any troll box questions?
I have a question. I'm not sure if I'm the troll box.
We've got a resident troll.
So clearly Bitmain's position is that they're very eager to have active roles in the rules of the network. And you know, whatever you think about that, that's what you think about it. But I was wondering, for everybody else on the panel, what do you feel miners' role is in the network? And is it simply as a service provider ordering transactions? Is it somewhere in between, like on Ethereum, where they can actually vote on block size, provided it's allowed by the network? Or is it the Bitmain type of position where any rule of the network is essentially on the table, provided that it's in whatever you think is your best interest? Where do you see miners in that type of interaction with the network at large?
So I think that anybody that owns Ethereum Classic, the token itself is a stakeholder, and their opinion does matter because they do hold equity in the system. So if a miner mines a lot of ETC and they submit a pull request to a node based on that, then I think that they should be given the same treatment as independent developer or a VC that owns a lot of Ethereum Classic and is making the same change. That being said, I think that in general, the ecosystems work best when there's a good division of power. When the miners who have their own set of incentives are able to focus on competing and providing and collecting as many of the block rewards as possible, and then of course giving feedback because they're stakeholders, but also working with developers and allowing there to be a division between developers and miners because they're trying to do different things. I think that there is somewhat of a different incentives. Like the issue is, the core issue that I see is that miners will always want to mine as many transactions as possible. That it's just because they only have to pay one instantaneous cost, which is I mined it, I got the fee. Everybody else in the network, exchanges, nodes, normal people, have to store those transactions for the rest of time.
And I mean, I guess this is a problem on Ethereum of the miners controlling the gas limit.
Absolutely.
Of course they're going to vote it up.
Absolutely.
Forever to infinity.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a counterbalance on that, you reach an unsustainable position.
Absolutely. So this is one of those things where I don't have the answer. There's certain, I'm a big believer in that I talk what I'm confident on, and I'm confident on the hashing algorithm choice, and I have my own ideas. But in terms of governance and where are those limits in the social contract between the miners and between node operators and between users, that's still something that I'm learning about, and I'm learning from other community members, and I'm open to being influenced on.
Anybody else got anything to add to that, or we'll just move on to the next question and then be
touching
done?
on the same question that you asked. It's in the beginning, when I joined the space in 2014, the people who were owning mining farms were people coming from maybe a paper factory. Someone owned a paper factory, someone owned some other kind of factory. Usually people who owned a factory that produces something, because mining has the same kind of economics where you buy real estate, you find your, you see the tax regulations that apply to you, and you're producing something, a product, just cutting costs wherever you can. And so I saw those kind of people entering in, and they were not very well versed with the crypto. Most of the mining farm owners I met at that time, but now I'm seeing the same people or the new ones who are coming up big time in mining are well versed with what are the new protocol changes happening. They have a say on it, and they have some opinion on it because they believe some is good for the long-term growth of the ecosystem and thus their mining farm operation over the other. And the ones from the old times who were not so well versed with it, they're hiring CTOs of some other mining company or some company that is producing something on the blockchain to advise them on what is best for the long-term growth of the ecosystem. So with time, the mining market is maturing, that's a sign, and people are more aware of the technology and what's good for the long-term growth of the ecosystem than they used to be before.
Any final word, Henry?
I'll just say that I think mining is going to change substantially when the rewards are a lot smaller. So, you know, when Bitcoin supply reaches 21 million, then miners will be transaction engines. Fundamentally, I think we're going to see value add from some of the other miners on some of the other blockchains where they can provide more services than just putting currency back into the float, or getting the transaction fee. So the storage coins, for instance, the miners could actually be their own storage providers.
Any Trollbox? Or just garbage in there?
They're asking you where's the cake guy?
Where's the cake guy? Who cake guy?
The guy with the Canadian flag. That was
Where, have you got your flag with you? Can you come on and wear it for your panels that you're moderating? We can supply that again. Okay, I'd like to just thank everyone very much for participating here.